She ran barefoot through the rain, her tiny hands covered in mud and tears. "Somebody help my mama!" she screamed, but the town kept its doors shut. Out in the fields, a shadow moved, a man they called the Giant Farmer, watching from afar. No one knew why he suddenly dropped his tools and started running toward the cries. Was it guilt? Was it mercy? Or something darker? Because that night, a truth buried for years was about to surface, and it would change everything they thought they knew about that small, quiet town. The sun was setting over Willow Creek, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and red. 8-year-old Amara Jenkins chased butterflies near the edge of the cornfields, while her mother, Ruth, finished her shift at the farmhouse down the road. It was a small, forgotten town, one where everyone knew each other's names, and everyone pretended that life was simple. But for Ruth, life was anything but simple. Every day she scrubbed floors and served meals for the same families who whispered behind her back. She smiled through it all, because that's what mothers do. She told Amara to dream big, to never let the color of her skin decide how far she could go. Their home was a small wooden shack just beyond the farmer's land. The roof leaked when it rained, but inside, laughter often drowned out the thunder. Amara loved her mother's stories, the ones about strength, about surviving storms, yet beneath that warmth something had changed. Lately, the town had grown colder. Ruth noticed how the farmer's sons stared longer than usual, their smiles no longer kind. How her pay came late. How whispers followed her name at church. That afternoon, when she told Amara she'd be home late, there was a look in her eyes, a quiet worry she didn't explain. Amara didn't understand it then. She just waved goodbye as her mother walked down that dusty path toward the fields. By nightfall, the rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavy. Hours passed, but Ruth never returned. And when Amara heard the screams echoing from the fields, she knew something was terribly wrong, because sometimes the worst monsters aren't the ones that hide in the dark. They're the ones everyone refuses to see. The storm raged through the night, thunder rolling across the open fields like the voice of something angry and unseen. Amara sat by the window clutching her mother's worn shawl. Every few minutes she thought she saw a shadow move near the barn, but when she blinked, it was gone. By morning, Ruth still hadn't returned. The little girl's voice echoed through the dirt road as she called her mother's name. Neighbors peeked through their curtains but said nothing. No one wanted to get involved, not when it came to the Jenkins family. When Amara finally reached the farmhouse, her small hands trembled as she knocked on the heavy wooden door. The door opened to reveal Mr. Carson, the landowner they called the Giant Farmer. He was built like an oak tree, tall, broad, and always silent. His face showed no emotion, just the faint trace of mud on his boots. "She didn't show up for work," he said flatly. "Probably ran off." But Ruth Jenkins wasn't the kind of woman who ran away. Amara knew that. And as she looked at the farmer's boots, she noticed something, red stains mixing with the mud. Her heart pounded. Rumors spread fast in Willow Creek. Some said Ruth was seen walking near the river. Others whispered that she'd been caught somewhere she didn't belong. By noon, the sheriff arrived, but only to ask a few hollow questions. He didn't write anything down. He didn't look at the farmer's boots. He just tipped his hat and drove away. That night, Amara returned to the fields alone, lightning slicing through the sky above her. The corn stalks bent with the wind, whispering secrets she couldn't understand. Then she saw it. Near the old well, a patch of disturbed earth, freshly dug. Her hands shook as she stepped closer, calling out again and again, and that's when a flashlight beam cut through the darkness. "You shouldn't be here," a voice growled. It was the farmer's oldest son, his breath thick with alcohol. He took a step closer, then another, his boots sinking into the wet soil. Amara turned and ran, her small feet splashing through puddles, her lungs burning with fear. Behind her, laughter echoed, a cruel, twisted sound that chased her through the rain. She didn't stop until she reached Town Square, collapsing under the weight of her own panic. People gathered around her, asking what happened. But before she could speak, the sheriff appeared again. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice low and calm. Now, little one. Let's not cause trouble. Trouble. That's what they called it when a black woman went missing. Trouble was when a child begged for someone to care. Days passed. Then a week. Ruth's name was no longer mentioned in church. The farmer returned to his fields, whistling the same tune as always, but Amara didn't stop searching. Every night she stood by that same dusty road, holding her mother's shawl and waiting for a voice she would never hear again. And one morning, when the sun rose and lit up the fields of Willow Creek, something glimmered near the old well, something small, something familiar. It was her mother's cross necklace, half buried in the mud. That was the moment Amara stopped being afraid. Because now she knew the truth wasn't gone, it was buried. And she was going to dig it up, no matter who tried to stop her. The morning was unnaturally still, the kind of silence that makes the air feel heavier. Amara stood at the edge of the field, her small frame swallowed by the endless rows of corn. In her trembling hands, she held her mother's cross, the one she found buried in the mud. She had followed the faint trail behind the barn, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. That's when she saw them, the farmer and his two sons standing near the old well. They were laughing, low, cruel laughter that didn't belong to men with clean consciences. Something glinted near their boots. A piece of fabric she recognized. Her mother's dress. Her breath caught. The world tilted. Without thinking, Amara stepped forward. "You hurt my mama!" she shouted, her voice cracking through the heavy morning air. The laughter stopped. The farmer turned slowly, his expression empty, his shadow stretching long across the wet soil. "Go home, girl," he muttered. "Ain't nothing here for you." But she didn't move. She stood her ground, tears cutting through the dirt on her cheeks. "You hurt her!" she screamed again. Her voice carried through the fields, breaking the quiet, breaking the lie everyone had agreed to believe. Then the farmer took a step forward. 1, 2. His boots sank deep into the ground, the same earth that had swallowed her mother whole. His hand tightened around his shovel as thunder rolled in the distance. Before anything else could happen, a door slammed open from the farmhouse. Mrs. Carson, the farmer's wife, appeared, pale and shaking. "Stop!" she cried. Her eyes met Amara's. For a long, unbearable moment, time froze. Then she whispered the words that made the ground feel like it vanished beneath them both. "I saw what they did." The men froze. The air thickened with a silence so sharp it hurt to breathe. And then, just like that, Amara wasn't just a little girl anymore. She was the voice of truth in a town built on silence, because once the truth is spoken out loud, it can never be buried again. The storm that night never truly ended. It just moved inside the hearts of everyone in Willow Creek. By morning, word had spread. Mrs. Carson had spoken the truth. The sheriff returned, this time not with questions, but with silence and shame. The fields were dug up, and what they found beneath them broke the illusion of that peaceful little town forever. Ruth Jenkins didn't come home, but her voice, through her daughter, echoed louder than thunder. Amara stood at the edge of the crowd, her small hands clutching that silver cross as the townspeople stared at what they had chosen not to see. Some cried. Some turned away. Others finally looked at her and realized that the color of her skin had never been the crime. Days turned into weeks. The farmer and his sons were taken away, but justice, as always, came late and felt small. The fields that once fed the town now grew wild, untamed, like the truth they tried to bury. Years later, Amara returned as a grown woman. She stood where her mother once worked, where whispers once followed her like shadows. And this time, people listened. She spoke in schools, on courthouse steps, in front of cameras, telling not just her story, but the stories of so many whose cries were never heard. Because racism doesn't always wear a hood or carry a rope. Sometimes it hides behind quiet smiles, polite excuses, and doors that never open for those who knock. Amara's story became a mirror, one that forced people to see what they had ignored for too long. And though she could never bring her mother back, she carried her legacy in every word, every tear, every truth she dared to tell. Because silence protects the oppressor, but stories like hers protect the truth. So, the question isn't what happened that night in Willow Creek. The real question is, how many more stories like Ruth Jenkins will it take before we finally say, no more?